So hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 30 years of experience at NIH as a grantee, intramural researcher, staff writer, and now a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land nearly $500 million in federal funding during the course of my career, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions live. And I'm sure you have many of them because we haven't met in a month and we're coming up on a deadline. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. A reminder for those of you who are attending live, you are in listen-only mode, but you can type questions into the Q&A box. I do have some questions that were emailed ahead of time to me that I'd like to cover, but I always give priority to the people who have attended. So if you have questions about your application or general grantsmanship questions in general, feel free to type those into the Q&A box. And if you have any comments that you want to share during the course of our discussion, feel free to put those in the chat box. A reminder that if you're watching a recording of this, we are recording this on January 11th, 2023. If you're watching this as a recording, things change quickly at NIH. So whatever we're saying today is true today, but you should always double check on the NIH website or with your program officer to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information about your the NIH policies, review criteria, and applications. So what you should be viewing in the library now, I would suggest probably if you're applying for a February deadline, at this point, you probably have a lot of your narrative together, I hope. So maybe the one thing you want to consider watching is the checklist to avoid top mistakes. In terms of updates at NIH, as I have said repeatedly, but just it bears repeating because I do see some new names in the attendee list. NIH has extended their post-submission material policy again this cycle. So for those who don't know, post-submission material is certain types of information that are allowed to be updated on your application package after you upload and 30 days before your study section meets. That's the window of time where you're allowed to update information about your application. The change in policy is that NIH is accepting preliminary data as allowable post-submission material. So they've been doing this every cycle since the pandemic began, and they've announced that it will be the case for this cycle as well. So if that's of use to you, most people update things like publication information. You probably are familiar with that type of post-submission material or like videos, that kind of thing. But you can update preliminary data as post-submission material. Other things that I want to draw to your attention are that you should be using Forms H at this point. So check your forms to make sure they're up to date. The expiration date is usually in the top right corner. Work with your pre-award support office to make sure you're in the right form set. Be aware that there's a new data policy. We've covered this in detail in past sessions, and if you missed those, you can view them on our YouTube channel. And there are possible new scoring criteria on the horizon, which I'll talk about a bit today if we have time, but I did get a lot of questions emailed to me ahead of time, and I'd like to answer the questions of the people who are attending. So I see we have one question. Quick question, I see many grants in the approach section. I think that question got cut off. So if the person would like to continue, go ahead and continue that. So in the meantime, I'm going to start answering some of the questions that were emailed to me ahead of time. One very quick and easy one. Let me pull up the question. Hold on a second. And I apologize, I have a cold today. Not COVID, thank goodness, but let's see. Since I'm writing an R21 proposal, is it necessary to include paragraphs of rigors of prior research and scientific rigor in the research strategy section? I read a few examples from my colleagues and did not see the rigor paragraphs in their R21 proposals. So the answer to that is a resounding yes. You should be dealing with rigor, particularly scientific rigor, in pretty much every mechanism that NIH puts out. So it doesn't matter if it's a K, an R21, an R03, an R01, a training grant, a T-level training grant, a P-level center grant application, a cooperative agreement. I can virtually guarantee you that every single one of those will contain rigor scoring criteria of some kind and instructions that pertain to rigor. I cannot remember the last time I saw any funding opportunity announcement coming out of NIH in any mechanism anywhere from any institute, period, that does not ask for rigor. So I would look carefully to see exactly what they're asking. In fact, for some mechanisms like T32s, they actually have a separate attachment. Sometimes it's a 3-page attachment that asks you to deal with certain aspects of rigor. So that's not going away. And it's not going away if they implement the new scoring criteria, which are very likely. You're still going to be asked about rigor, so you may as well get comfortable writing them. So, and I just want to let Mohammed know, I think only part of your question came through in the Q&A box. So if you would like to type the rest of that, I'd be happy to answer it. So don't be bashful about asking your questions. There are lots of people on the call today, and people are not typing their questions. I have some email that I'm happy to go over, but this is the benefit of having me live. Okay, so here's Mohammed's question. I've seen applications write the following outline. Aim one rationale. Do we include preliminary results here? 2, statistical analyses. 3, expected results and anticipated problems and alternative strategies. Is there something else that is needed? I also have a similar question. Many grants are missing scientific rigor and ensuring robust and unbiased approach. These are separate paragraphs. Okay, so Mohammed's question is basically, how do I structure the approach? That's basically what he's asking us. And there are many ways to do it. So in my Master the R series part 4 approach, I give lots of different variations on that theme of how to structure the approach, but I'm going to give you a few examples so that you get a sense of what you should be thinking about. So most people have their preliminary data somewhere in the approach. Sometimes people will handle it in the significance section. That is not my preferred way to do it, although many funded grantees do like to do it that way. I prefer a significance section that's a little more salesy and a little shorter and punchier, where you summarize your preliminary data and then parenthetically send the reviewers to the approach section for details. So usually somewhere in the approach, you're going to have a preliminary data section. Somehow or another, you're going to deal with the aims, statistical analyses, expected results, potential problems and alternative strategies, and scientific rigor. Whether or not all of those subheaders are subheaders under each aim is up to you. So for example, some people will have preliminary data that deals with the whole project at the beginning of the approach. Then they may talk about the specific aims. They may have a statistical analysis section that deals with the whole project after the aims. They might have a scientific rigor section that pertains to the whole project and is its own paragraph. What else? Alternative potential problems and alternative strategies may be a separate paragraph that deals with the whole project, or any of those things may be subheaders under each aim. So there are many grantees who have aim 1 statistical analyses, aim 2 statistical analyses, et cetera, or aim 1 scientific rigor, aim 2 scientific rigor. So they could be subheaders under the aim itself, or they could just be single paragraphs that deal with the whole project. And any combination of these. So you might have a preliminary data section in the beginning that has all your preliminary data. And then you have aim 1 and aim 1 methods, aim 1 scientific rigor, aim 1 data analyses, and then aim 2 covering those same subheaders. And then at the end, you decide to do potential problems as a single paragraph for the whole project. It's up to you. how you want to do it. So you definitely have to have these headers. The question really becomes whether they are standalone paragraphs for the whole project or you repeat them under each aim. And it really depends on the project, not just the grantee. So each project, you may find it's intuitive to tell that project in a different way than an application you write next year. So you can handle it in any way you want, as long as you talk about it somewhere and have the appropriate header. So the other thing that you talked about is you have seen applications with a scientific rigor header and ensuring robust and unbiased results headers in separate paragraphs. I'm a big fan of labeling them and having a separate paragraph, primarily because reviewers have a scoring sheet in front of them, and they are literally checking boxes off and making comments and awarding numeric scores as they're reading your application. I like the headers in the approach or anywhere to match the scoring sheet that they're looking at so that reviewers aren't hunting for information. So if scientific rigor is something on their scoring sheet, which it is, in fact, there should be something in your approach that's labeled scientific rigor. Don't make them work for it. Remember that reviewers are doing this on top of an 80-hour work week. This is a volunteer thing. They're doing it at like 2 o'clock in the morning when they're exhausted. If you make them work for it, they're not going to thank you for that. So make it as easy as humanly possible for them to find what they're looking for. And again, Mohammed, I just want to send you, I know that you haven't, I have not reviewed that part of your application yet. As you're thinking about how to create an outline for the approach, I strongly encourage you to go ahead and take a look at Master the R Series Part 4, how to write the approach. Everybody on this call has access to my courses. That's why you're invited to AGE. It's meant to supplement the courses. So Mohammed, if you need information about how to access that, just email info@megbouvier.com and we'll send you the organization-specific URL to access it. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, great. I'm glad it helped. So another question, to what degree can we refer to the human subjects PDF when it comes to items such as inclusion, exclusion criteria, statistical methods, etc., especially with an R21, space is so limited in scientific narrative. I have referred to the human subjects PDF, but it appears to irritate reviewers. Okay, this is a great question because I get this one all the time. And I agree, sometimes it does irritate reviewers, even though it says in SF 424 that you're not supposed to duplicate information in the research strategy that appears in the human subjects form. And I think it irritates reviewers because you're making them go look for the information elsewhere. So here is my compromise that I suggest to grant writers. I would do both. So you don't need to treat something in detail in the research strategy, particularly on an R21, because or an R03 where it's a 6-page format. But I would give them the key take-home message. So your example specifically dealt with inclusion, exclusion criteria. I wouldn't put the exhaustive list of eligibility criteria, but I would list the handful that are mission critical for the reviewer to understand the project in the research strategy, in the approach section. And then parenthetically say, for details on eligibility criteria, see section 2 point, whatever it is, 7 or whatever, in the human subjects form. And statistical methods, again, I would give them the key information they need in the approach section to be able to review the application. And I'm wondering, when you say statistical methods, I'm thinking that that's in section 4, and I'm wondering if you're doing a clinical trial under an R21, which would be highly unusual because of the budget. So most R21s have a cap on the directs at 275,000. And while they do allow a clinical trial sometimes in an R21, it's really hard to do one in that budget. So I'm wondering if you're doing a human subjects non-clinical trial, statistical methods should be in the approach section. If you're truly doing a clinical trial on an R21, hey, kudos to you if you can make that budget work. It's for a clinical trial. Wow, I'm impressed because not many people can do that in the R21 budget. So it would indeed be in section 4 of the human subject section that you deal with the exhaustive description of the statistical methods. But I would still put something on the statistical methods and the data analyses in the approach section so that they at least have some sense of what methodology you're using and what your primary endpoints are and what methods you're going to use to arrive at the answers that you're looking for and how you're going to power them, your sample sizes, that kind of thing. And then again, in parentheses, say, for detailed explanation of statistical methods, see section 4 point whatever, I forget what it is, of the human subjects form. So that's kind of how I've gotten around this issue of pissing off reviewers, because I agree with you that it is really clear in SF 424 that you are supposed to go and put that stuff in the human subjects form and not duplicate it in the approach. But reviewers tend to get a little pissy when you do that. So that's been my compromise. And it doesn't seem to flag anybody as doing something that they're not allowed to do. So, okay, so I think that's it for questions we have live. So I'm going to answer, I had 2 other questions. They're both a little on the long side. I'm going to start with one having to do with a cap on R01s. So, oh, hold on, there's another live one. I'm trying to submit an NCI K22 application for next month. I want to know, compared to K99, which is 5 years, how much specific aims should I propose? Okay, so there's a big, how can I ensure I'm not proposing too much? Okay, so the K99 is a little different. So I wouldn't necessarily compare it to that, because that's a phased mechanism. For those who don't know, it's called a kangaroo, colloquially K99 R00. So you have to meet certain milestones in the K99 to move on to the R00 phase. So I wouldn't, for the person who's asking this, I wouldn't necessarily compare your aims page to a K99 there, because it's going to look kind of different because the K99 is phased. I think you're better off looking at other types of Ks, like a K01, a K08, a K23, even an R21 or an R03, which is going to have a more similar scope and budget to a K22 than a K99 would. So typically you're going to propose 2 aims. That's a very typical scenario on a K22. And I would, if you don't, the effort and time is similar between, I know that they're similar between R00 and K22, but the aims page is going to look different because the K99 R00 is a phased mechanism and the K22 is not. The K22 is mentored. So the effort and time are similar to lots of things, not just the K99 and R00. So here's what I suggest you do. Right, K22 is not mentored, but don't worry about that, because the aims are, the budget and the percent effort are going to be similar to a K01, a K08, a K23, an R21, and an R03. And those small format Rs are also not mentored. We're talking about the scope of what you're proposing, right? So the scope and the budget of what you're proposing. So what I suggest you do is go to your pre-award support office and ask if they can show you an example of a funded K22, or even one that scored well. And ask your mentors, ask people in your lab if they have one that you can see. And there may be one on the NIAID website. I can't quite remember what I want to say their K sample is a K08 though. But in terms of the scope and the budget, you're probably looking at 2 aims, and you want to pattern it more after something like an R21 or a K01 than the K99 R00. I wouldn't use that aims page as a sample, because it's going to talk about milestones and phases, and that's not relevant at a K-22. So that's my advice. My advice in general is when you're looking for samples, ask your pre-award support office if they're willing to share samples, or at least share a name of somebody in your organization who you then can request a sample from. And in terms of scope and budget, you can look at something a little older, even something going back 3 to 5 years would still be relevant on a K-22. Okay, so talking about a cap on the number of R01s, I got, and I get this question a lot, so I figured I would address this one. So I had a person, an admin person, ask me about, she has a grantee who already has multiple funded R01s and is still submitting, and is concerned about any potential cap on an R01. And for those of you earlier in your career on this call, I realize that may be aspirational, but this may you be so lucky to have this problem, and it is something to consider. So I have a couple of thoughts on this. So the person who sent me the question accurately identified that in 2017, NIH had proposed a cap and then quickly gave up on that idea because there was a lot of pushback on it. At the heart of this issue is the concern on the part of junior faculty who are trying to land their first R01 that there are many R01s in the hands of very few people. And I think it was something in 2017, I think the statistic was something like 6% of R01 recipients had 3 or more, I think it was, R01s. And the cap that's usually bandied about is 3 to 5. So over the years, I've been doing this work directly as a grant writer and grant editor and advisor and mentor since 2007. During that time, I've seen a number of institutes have an informal cap on applications. I've seen study sections not have a policy, but I've heard of reviewers expressing concern about applicants who have many applications. And of course, the Center for Scientific Review has been talking for years about and beta testing anonymous review, which would mean that reviewers don't know who the applicant is and wouldn't know if that person had lots of R01s. So there are lots of things at play here. So I kind of wrote out a list of my suggestions. One is, of course, you've got to pay really close attention to your percent effort, because if you're a PI on a lot of R01s, you're going to have to be really careful that your percent effort doesn't sum to more than 100%. And once you start dropping below a certain percent effort, it's not commensurate with being a PI anymore. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing is to think about formal or informal rules within your institute or center. Now, this particular question that was emailed to me justly, accurately said the PI does not want to ask the program officer, and I fully understand that. This is where somebody like me comes in. I can ask them because I have lots of clients at lots of organizations, so it doesn't violate anybody's confidentiality if I just ask about their policy. You can also ask them from a different email, like a personal email that's a Gmail account that doesn't have your name associated with it. And you don't have to sign your name. You can just ask, just as a potential grantee. So I would look into that. The other thing is that it would be good to do a little bit of intelligence gathering about the informal sense on your study section. If you know somebody who is currently on your study section, or has been on that study section or submitting to that study section, if they happen to know if that's something that reviewers have discussed, not feeling good about somebody coming in for their 3rd or 4th R01, feeling like that's not kosher. I don't know of any study section that's ever had that policy, but I know of many study sections where reviewers have expressed concern about that. So you may want to look into that. And for that matter, I will share that I have many successful grantees who apply to multiple institutes and multiple study sections so that they're kind of diversifying their portfolio and sending their applications to lots of different places so that institutes and study sections do not necessarily know right away that this is somebody who submits a lot. But maybe the most important thing that I want to impart to you is that if you are a grantee who's looking at your third, fourth, or fifth R01, it may be time to move up to the center grant level. I would think that by the time you're getting to that point, instead of running all these different R01 projects, what you may want to do is begin to look around on your campus for certain key alliances so that you're identifying, and you can work with your pre-award support office on this, identify 2, 3, or 4 different key strengths on your campus and start to think strategically about types of centers that would capitalize on all those strengths. And then think about building publications among that coalition and applying for seed money for things like cores that would then go on to be expanded within a center grant application, and really start to think more strategically about the types of R01s you're landing so that you could pull yourself up to the next level. Most of my applicants who are applying at the P level find that it's really hard, but that is the most gratifying stage of their career. So it may be time to start doing that. I do have a course on how to prepare. It's a course on how to write a multi-project submission like a center grant application, but it also talks about how to prepare for it. Okay, so I have a question, Meg, to whom in the IC would one address the question about R01 limit sentiments? I would say the program officer, any program officer. So, and again, you can send it from a Gmail account and you don't have to sign it, or you can ask somebody like me to send that question, I wouldn't send it from an organization-specific email, and I wouldn't necessarily sign it either. So you're just asking for general information, and I think it's okay to do that. So anyway, so I'm not going to get into the last question because it has to do with just-in-time requests. The only thing I'm going to say at the moment is that I've been getting, because NIH is still operating under a continuing resolution. This is bad news for applicants because NIH does not have an FY23 budget, even though technically FY23 began on October 1. The funding bill has not been passed. And given all the shenanigans in Congress right now, it's unclear when that's going to happen, which when we start to drag into like February and March, now we're starting to look at government shutdowns and not just a continuing resolution. The reason why that's bad news for applicants is that NIH typically, there's a continuing resolution is essentially an emergency funding bill. And NIH can continue to operate, but because they're unsure about what their ultimate budget number is going to be, most institutes will operate at 80% of the previous year's budget, so that if their funding goes down, they haven't overextended themselves in the early months of the year. What that means is delayed funding decisions. So unless you're scoring like in 2% on your R01, you may have delays in your funding, and that kind of sucks, and it can really mess up people's plans in terms of the sequencing and timing of their experiments and the potential start date. So be aware that that's the case, but in our next session 2 weeks from now, I'm going to get into that in a little more detail. And I've gotten a lot of questions about when funding decisions are made and just-in-time requests and what those mean, and the continuing resolution and what that means. And so I'm going to get into that in a lot more detail in our next session. So we are out of time. Feel free to email me questions. It's always an efficient way for me to gather information and sometimes infographics and websites to share with you guys. And in the meantime, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. So take care. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.